You know, this morning we kind of had panelists who were put into charities to help turn around, you know, charities that have been engulfed in scandals. I think it's very good in the afternoon for us to be a bit more positive near the end of the conference. Here we have two charities which are role models, you know, of governance. You know, they are award winners in the Charity Governance Awards. So I want to first open the first question to Daniel and to Stephen. In terms of clearly, you are now the benchmark in the charity sector, having been winners in different categories. What are the challenges you faced in terms of improving governance in those charities? So how do you overcome those challenges?
Well, since you started the question, I'll speak first, and then I'll leave my bigger brother, the large charity, to comment. We come from a small, medium charity, the Singapore Association for Mental Health. Our cause is about the mentally ill. It was started more than 45 years ago by a bunch of psychiatrists, mental health professionals, nurses, social workers, who were trying to help patients with mental illness to assimilate in society when they get discharged from the hospital. And it's kind of a hard job. It's very stigmatizing. At some point, we nearly didn't have money. So the main challenge really is, one, I think it's very entrenched in the people who started the cause. We've had members who've been on the board for many, many years. You know, 45 years, you'd imagine that there are people who've been there since the beginning who are involved, right? So that was one challenge, really very long-standing board members who had very strong sense of cause, but not necessarily a good idea of where the whole area of mental health in the community is going. They have certain strong preset views on things, and it was difficult to challenge some of that because they're very respectable and they've done a lot, and that's hard. So that's the first part. I mean, in terms of planning succession, both within the board and also within management. And I think that was one of the challenges. The other, I think, has to do with the finances. I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a doctor, so doctors, they don't manage money very well. They know how to charge, I suppose, overcharge. But we were growing. Mental health has become identified as important. In the last 10 years, we've really grown. In fact, our operational budget had doubled. And I was concerned with this kind of growth. We don't have some kind of financial sense of things. We might end up having cash flow problems, all kinds of issues that may arise because we didn't, monitor and govern this well. And a bunch of psychiatrists, social workers, and nurses aren't just the perfect people to do this. So therein lies the issues. I mean, the people, the succession planning, the replacement. I think those are the major challenges that we've had. Yeah.
Stephen.
Thank you all for being here. I'm not so sure that as an organization that I have anything to impart with you that you already don't know. But I suppose being privileged to become a winner of the Charity Governance Award places an obligation on me to try and spread the word and become an advocate for this. And I think the YMCA is a very old organization. It's been around in Singapore for 112 years, and worldwide it's a very well recognized institution. In Singapore, in the early days, I think most of you of my vintage would probably remember it as a place where you could go for extramural education, special enrichment classes, and swimming, tennis. But as things would evolve, these are things that the government got better after independence. They got better at doing. And we had to, over the years, start to look at how we reinvent our role in society. And as a community organization, as a people organization, we thought we could do more. And that's when, about 10 years ago, we thought, we'd have to provide services to fill gaps in the community service organizations at that time, which we identified. One was the volunteer resource, and that was right up our alley because we had a pretty strong membership base who were making use of facilities at the YMCA, but nothing much more beyond that. How were we contributing towards society? That was the big question mark. So slowly we evolved into an organization that involved training, managing, educating volunteers, and of course bringing this story out to VWOs as well as corporates, being a vehicle by which other corporates could also engage with volunteers through our ability to organize and bring these events together. So slowly as we grew bigger, of course the revenues also grew, and we felt that we need to be more accountable, and one of the things that we needed to do was to have board succession. And the question was, what was the biggest hurdle that we had? I think in terms of getting board renewal and board succession, that was the big hurdle that we had to cross. And it required a change of mindset. We had a very, very distinguished board, some of them who have been there for 20 over years. And it took some convincing. And eventually we convinced the majority of them to step aside. But mind you, you have to build a good pipeline of respectable candidates. And we had enough programs and activities to get volunteer committees set up and involving them early on. 2-3 years down the road, then you're starting to recognize their ability and bringing them up probably in co-option onto the board. So this pipeline is important. Then you cannot say already, oh, I got no one to come and take over, so I have to stay on. And that's a common complaint. Yeah. So these are the things that we had to put in place, what we had to overcome. Of course, changing some of the way that we set up the board in terms of renewal and retirement, and limiting the time at which you can spend on the board to 8 years, treasurer 4 years, members of the board 8 years, after which you have to step down. These were the things that we put in place. Yeah. So that's in a nutshell. I could go on quite long, but I better stop.
Yeah, maybe we'll come back to you. Well, maybe I'll ask you this, because I have been faced with that issue too, in the sense of, you say you managed to convince the board. I was involved with charity and I became the chairman, but we have board members who have been there for 30 over years, but nobody seemed to know a way, okay, to politely tell a board member to do that, and eventually somebody had to do it, and I had to do it, but it was not easy. How did you deal with that issue? As you said, you have a very distinguished board.
Partly, I would put it down to YMCA is not a direct service organization, right? So we don't serve any particular disadvantaged group of society. If we had to identify, there is one particular group which is the out-of-school at-risk youth through our Project Bridge and a vocational school. But that's essentially the only direct service. The rest of it is really engaging with volunteers. We have university YMCAs, where this is our initial recruitment and getting them into service learning and learning how to create interesting programs so that you can engage more volunteers and working with VWOs. So I earlier mentioned the word pipeline. That's the very important aspect of it. And I think we were blessed in the sense that we had many organizations that we were working with who were interested in getting programs up. And so to set up these programs, you needed to get committees going to think out of the box to see how we can engage more volunteers and also provide meaningful outcomes for the beneficiaries. And I guess this pipeline and being able to identify good candidates eventually convinced the board, okay, we'll step aside.
Okay, Stanley, I mean, from your perspective as chairman of MVPC, I mean, you see the whole a big chunk of the number of the charities. What do you see as their key challenges? And maybe Suin, and then from your point of view as a grant maker.
I'll try not to repeat what everybody has said, but I think succession planning is always a challenge. But the sector is very diverse. And, you know, what large organization faces is very different from small organization. And the maturity of the organization, again, poses different challenges. So I hope each of you will get our input and put it in the right context, some of which may not apply to you. I think the challenge of being very strategic about it is the important part for us moving forward in the sector. I think when we now review our constitution, review our mission, in new organization that I work with now, I actually put in the M&A limited term of service. So like MVPC, the chair cannot serve more than 6 years. That's also my out route. So I think succession planning mustn't be left to chance. It must actually be deliberate. It is easy, as Gerard said, I enjoyed Gerard's session in the morning, that the excuse of not being able to find a replacement is really an excuse. When forced upon us, it will, you know, the right people will come forward. And if we believe our mission is right, then the right people will come forward. Thanks.
For me, I'd like to add that I empathize with the charities, the challenges that they face. I would sum it up in, it's not all encompassing, but firstly, I feel that perhaps they might feel that they're always in a state of playing catch up. You know, what is considered good enough? Donors and beneficiaries both want to see programs and services. So if you've limited resources and your plate is full, you've got, you know, a board at your back and you've got operational issues to settle. So what was that G word again? You know, it kind of slips down, the things to do. Then there are charities I know that get extremely frustrated, distressed, and even puzzled by the requirements asked by funders. They just don't understand that they're not hitting the mark, but why it's not explained to them. So in response to that, I think donors or funders can keep the applications perhaps more concise and give them a reasonable time frame for the action. The grantee is also asked to be transparently honest in the presence of a funder, and that can be a very vulnerable position to be in. It takes a lot of trust. Yeah, so those are my observations.
You want to follow on your point about, you know, with charities kind of struggling with their resources and so on, and governance kind of perhaps go down the list of priorities. Of course, there are some would argue that with the small charities especially, focusing too much on governance actually may detract from their ability to deliver on their core mission. What is your take? You know, maybe come back to Daniel and Stephen in terms of, do you feel governance actually make you more effective or efficient, or you see that more as compliance?
Maybe I can speak first. I think that, you know, it's sometimes frightening to be judged and to be scrutinized. That's the only reason. Now, when you say that a small charity shouldn't have governance, well, it should have, but maybe shared governance. Why can't we share governance? We can, you know. There's nothing to stop us from doing that. A bunch of small charities can get together and say, let's form a board that oversees all of us, because we are in a similar sector. Why don't we try that? So I don't think that's a valid statement, that you don't have governance. Those structures and layers are very useful, and I personally think so, no matter what your size. I know that some members on this on the panel may disagree, or people on the ground may disagree with me, but I've always felt that it's good to have someone overseeing, because we always have our blind spots. I have my blind spots all the time. I can have all the mirrors, but there's a blind spot, and the car in your driving will invariably, you need some help, and it's best if you have an additional person in the seat next to you and others. And my whole sense of governance is that there's a lot of work that can be done if we are a bit more open. And shared governance is one concept that I think. The other way, of course, is you say no board members. Why not exchange board members? I mentioned this before many times. A lot of people laugh at me, but I think it's great. I would love. I'm going to step down from SMH soon, because I've already set a timeline. And when I do that, I'd like to go and join another board where I can enjoy seeing some of the work that's done. I believe that we have more than one thing that we're interested in, right? I mean, we all have different passions in life, and that keeps us going. Hopefully, I'll never retire in that sense.
Stephen.
The question was on, I suppose, governance, and where does it rank in terms of priorities of...
and how, in what way, specific examples in terms of, does it make it your organization more effective and efficient rather than more compliant, if you like?
Earlier, when I was discussing this with some of my colleagues also, we were talking about putting the cart before the horse and all this kind of thing. And I just wanted to bring up an example which actually starkly reminds us the value of actually being a trusted organization. And trusted organization not just amongst your financial donors, but also your volunteers. Because the volunteers would like to also be part, and I think this is especially true amongst our younger volunteers. They are better informed, they are enlightened individuals. They want to be part of an organization that gives them proper training, gives them a good connectability, if you like to call it, or a good networking and a good structure. So in order to have that all in place, actually processes, which includes your governance structures, is very important. And the example that I was going to tell you about is we were very kindly honored by being the winner of the governance award. Almost immediately we realized a benefit that came out of that, because I think it must have been carried in the internet, and people must have tweeted about it, maybe even. And we received a donation. This wasn't money laundering, by the way. I checked. And it came from a very, very reputed source right across the world from the United States. Now, one may say that, okay, YMCA has a name that carries very far, but I think there are YMCAs and there are YMCAs as well. I think they recognize the fact that we were highly rated in terms of governance, okay? And I can't reinforce more the fact that if you're going to look for large donations and for recognition from donors, this aspect of it is very important.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor at this point? No? Maybe we can go to the pigeonhole question. Is it coming up?
Yep.
Okay, which is actually the issue in terms of who funds capability building and building governance capacity. I think that's the most, that is the question with the most votes, and I guess the issue of often government and funders appear less keen to fund corporate services and HQ function. So they fund only direct services. And of course, you often hear donors saying that every dollar that we donate, we want $1 to go to the beneficiary. You know, we don't want to pay for administration and so on. So that's a common view. So can I ask the panelists in terms of, and actually related to that, the second question, how to get resources for funding to put good governance in place. So maybe can I ask the panelists in terms of, is that true? Maybe from your point of view, your foundation, is it true that you are not prepared to pay for funding of capacity building?
No, it's not true, but it's true that many funders, I think, many charities would face that with funders. We have come in, it's not true for us because we have come in to support funding gaps or proposals where the requester had a lot of difficulty or challenges getting traction from funders and supporters. For instance, the Community Justice Center that we seeded, you'd think that the cause is very worthwhile, certainly, to help needy litigants and persons access justice, channeling them to resources that are already available, but may be under their radar. You know, however, they had challenges getting adequate support, whether in terms of funding or other resources. So we stepped in and to give the seed funding that was necessary for them to launch the program. And the reason for that, I think the challenge they face could possibly be because funders would think, oh, if I give seed money, naturally we go into administrative costs, fund the salary, yeah? Fund operational expenses, etc. In this case, we stepped in because we knew that was a necessity. You have to get a good person, senior management, everything aligned down the road in order to get the ship to float. And then now, with us in, the organization has managed to secure more funding, more support, whether in cash or kind. So I think that is one example that I'd like to share.
One of the things that I've been thinking actually is the way we, when you say should government fund some of this development of governance frameworks, my own sense is if we measure things, you're more likely to get funding anyway. And government likes measurement. I believe that we should do more measurement of boards, both in terms of what we discussed earlier about transparency index and so forth, but also, I suppose, things like some outcome measures. Because one of the problems that we have in our organization and in my work in general is we always measure cost as though we, cost is everything. Cost isn't everything. It's value that's important. And value is undergirded by cost, but it's based on outcomes. So if we can say that the board is doing its job and you measure that, surely that is worthy of funding.
I think this morning we had some discussion about the challenges of measuring outcomes. I think that's kind of separate. Stephen, Stanley, you have something to add? Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. I think in the last 10 years, there's a lot more awareness of governance. The fact that all of you are here tells us that there is more awareness about good governance. But good governance in itself doesn't necessarily cost money. It actually requires first to establish a good board, a diverse board that have the right skill set to lead us. With a good board, it leads to appointment of good management or good oversight. Capacity building is a slightly different issue, and very often you need different investment. But I think once we are clear that there is a need for accountability, we have started on the journey on good governance. So let's not sort of think that you must have a lot of resources to practice that. It applies to all of us.
Yep. Yes.
I can add on to both what Daniel and Stanley is saying. How does good governance help charities enhance, right? How efficient they are and how effective they are. But the way we have to define effective and efficient, okay, so there's an ant on your plate and you don't want it there. As the outcome, you want to make sure that's not there, right? Do you take like, it's effective if you take a hammer to get rid of it, but it's not exactly efficient. You know what I mean? You can just blow it away and it also disappears. So that's a different kind of impact we have. Now, measuring outcomes helps you to, I feel, helps you to differentiate between what's real data and what's actually real knowledge. And the interpretation and the context matters. Not everyone has the skill to do so, right? And the framework keeps changing, and sometimes the goalposts keep changing. When we get grantees telling us that, there's a great demand for our services, so therefore we have to raise more funds, can you just give us more money? I'm wondering whether this is where there is an imbalance between program growth and program revenue, and whether you are actually overstretching yourselves. So some of the things that go in my head. And then we talk about assessing cost effectiveness, right? I think that's critical because it's a stopgap measure to make sure that your team is not going to be a team of action junkies going out there just to do stuff. What are you really doing? What kind of outcomes are you hoping to achieve with what you do? Have you thought about the processes leading up to these outcomes? You can actually become economical, like he says, where a small investment in terms of the salary of one trainer who then trains a whole group of volunteers to participate and focus their energies around a social cause could be a very worthwhile investment, for instance.
Okay, maybe we go to the second related question, which is the... Sorry, Danny, you want to...
I wanted to just add a little bit to... Maybe a little pipe for CNPL and NVPC. I mean, I think sometimes some guidance helps. We certainly got a lot of help trying to look at these issues, like planning strategy, what you said about, why are we measuring outcomes? I mean, it's linked to our mission and all these things. It's good to have some guidance. I think NCSS has been doing this as well. And I think there is a need for us to think, board meetings shouldn't be about operational issues where you're sitting down there and saying, okay, we approve this, approve that. It's about, okay, where are we going? Is this the right direction? Where is this sector? Maybe our charity is no longer relevant. Maybe we ask ourselves, it's not relevant, what do we do? Do we close ourselves down? Do we talk to our partners and say, is there new relevance to the work that we do? And I think that's the job of the board. That's governance. That's really spending money wisely and prudently and being efficient and not be, creating value for our society as a whole.
Yeah, the second question is kind of related to the first, which is the funding issue. But this is, whether the panelists, I guess, maybe looking more at Stephen and Daniel in terms of where do they obtain resources and funding to put in place your corporate governance best practices for you to become award winners, if you like.
The Center for Non-Profit Leadership is one example.
So there are various organizations out there, I think, and of course there's the VCF funding and
Does anyone want to say something?
Yeah.
Why not? You want to say something?
Yeah. Stephen?
Okay, the question was related to funding for capability building, internal funding. It's not easy for BWOs just to build a social enterprise, but I mean, in our example, we have two social enterprises. One is the hostel, and the other one is our education department. So they are run as profit organizations and on a plow-by social enterprise basis. So that money goes into funding the staffing of all the programs that we deliver, so that donations that we raise for our programs, every single dollar reaches the program itself without having to fund the executives or the staff. So answering that question about how to fund capability, it is, in a sense, good to have some social enterprise of your own. But otherwise, we need to be able to communicate to funders that this is an essential part of managing donors' funds properly to make sure that the outcomes are good, right? Program evaluation, for instance, you have to do that. And it's not, you can't do it without a cost. There is a cost. I know NCSS can help out, can provide you with some of the templates for you to do it. you should exploit that and look at your programs, because if it's not achieving the outcomes which your board has dictated, you should change them, as Daniel has said, or maybe even close them down. So to do this, you need funds, internal funds or external funds. And I think if funders and donors see that you are continually trying to improve the delivery of your service, your program, the effectiveness and the outcome, I think they wouldn't be against committing some money towards capability building. In the YMCA, we have a very simple rule for our staff, 70-30 rule. So whatever we do, the staff cost shouldn't be more than 30% of the value that we are driving down to the end beneficiary.
Suyin, you want something?
Yeah. There's a lot. There's possibly some fear and apprehension, about what does all this mean. I think if you are existing already pretty well, you just also want to know how well you're doing, and you need to communicate that to whether you're a funder or even to your own team. And so all these things, you have meetings and all already to do so. So in fact, you do have it in your organization, I'm very sure. You already are working towards getting your mission, your solicitations for grants, your resource allocation aligned. But just how you present that information timely to the right donors, that's critical too. So make sure the dots are joined. When you get all that mission, solicitations, and resource allocation aligned, then you're getting yourself organized. And that's an important process, because being organized gets you to reflect about certain outcomes that you want to achieve, all right? And it means that, and how can you evaluate those outcomes? How can you see them? Outcomes are things that, result in some changes that you see over time. So these can be reflected in your membership. Your members have grown to be not just age-wise more mature, but, the sort of abilities that they have, the outreach has grown. It could also be reflected in changes in the organization, the way that you internally run, diversify your funds. You have more and more confidence to do so. That's great too. It could also be reflected in the well-developed ladders of career progression among your staff. So you've moved. Another part is the community changes. That means what sort of influence have you started to make within the community? You have some sort of impact there. People look to you. If you park certain resources and certain sort of efforts, people follow, right? Because they know that's where the gaps are. If you are doing it, that certainly reiterates that gut feel that that's plausibly the right direction. So those are some things that you can start to, take into account. And a lot of them are doing so already. I've seen the reports, yeah.
I think the third question, I did something to my iPad, so my third question kind of disappeared, okay? But I think the third question is kind of related to the earlier one, which is because we talk about kind of people being unwilling to fund, perhaps donors being unwilling to fund for governance, building governance capabilities, for example. And then I guess the third question is kind of, here we go, how can we help the public to understand the rationale for governance practices? I guess the issue is, for them to be willing to fund governance, they kind of need to understand why governance is important. Any views from the panelists?
I think that transparency is critical in some of this, and sharing some of those things. Today we have social media and all this, the web, and everybody gets information. It's a fantastic opportunity for charities. I cannot understate it. It's an opportunity for you to put out what your work is, what's your passion, what you are all about, and also for you to share some of those governance issues. Put our board members on the web. Even give more details. Actually, we don't do that in SAMH, and I've been saying maybe we should put details. Put up how much the top staff earn and stuff like that, which I think it helps. And then, well, there's a cost to this. Obviously, you can tell your funders that to do this we need to have, and that's one way. Stephen, anything else?
reiterate very similar ways. But to educate the public, right? I mean, generally, if you're talking about funders, there's one way to reach out to them. But the public, and because we're a volunteer organization, we have to mobilize volunteers. We have to reach out to them. And certainly social media is a very, very good way. And one good example was when we organized the youth conference for the YMCA here in the Asia Pacific 2 years ago. I think one of the primary things that the youth organizing committee, and this was left in the hands of a tri-uni-Y organizing committee to organize. And the media publicity, the video, the concepts they used, they were applying their skills that they learned in school, and using social media was almost boundless. And it really reached out because we looked to about 15 different countries coming here. So it engaged them, they reached out to the public. I think many other youth and school children also saw. So I cannot emphasize more in terms of getting your story out to the public. And in our case, the programs, in the case of a VWO with direct beneficiaries, yes, it's important to communicate to them about whom your beneficiaries are, but also communicating about your structure, your organization, who are the people, how it's set up, even to the point of telling people about what are you doing to improve your corporate governance. Yeah.
I think those of you who were here this morning, I mean, Mrs. Fang was also talking about one of the trusts of the Charity Council this year is to engage the public more and to develop this sense of informed giving. I guess that's where the Charity Council can probably play a role in terms of educating the public about the need for governance, the rationale for governance, and hopefully over time, donors will become more educated about this issue. Any other burning questions from the floor?
Here on the side.
Right.
Thanks. I'm Karina from Aware. I have two questions. One is, aside from like winning prizes for corporate governance or the other end, which is being in a scandal, have you actually seen like a relationship between people, donors and good governance? I mean, do they really care? My sense is good governance is a must, and for many reasons, but I don't actually see that the donors are that sophisticated in a sense to really like care whether you have really good governance. That's one. Two, I'm actually really interested to find out what both Daniel and Stephen's organizations did and why you won the award. What can we learn from you? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll ask Suyin first. Donors, I mean, do they really care about governance? From your point of view, do you really care about governance, and I guess what aspects of governance you will care most about?
I think generally Karina is not wrong. In the sense that it's not that they don't care. Some of the challenges faced by donors could be that they just have also low capacity. It's not just the charities having low capacity. The donors themselves don't have the capability to go and process, evaluate, assess all sorts of grants and, chart it. Few have that. We have a team to do that, but few have that ability. So from both sides, then you're trying to narrow the gap in a way, That's why I think one solution would be that it would be a grantee-led process. And you and the charity and the donor coming together to work out what the perceived outcomes might be. Because you're sort of having to articulate short-term goals with some sort of long-term vision in mind. So each time is a bit like different. You invest in someone's education, but he's not really going to be finishing his course until 4 years' time, and then whether he gets a job, etc. I mean, which is the outcome, which is the indicator, You're using some sort of proxy indicators every time. So therefore that dialogue is important, or else you're always going to sort of miss the mark a bit and not fulfill your own expectations, much less the donor's expectations, right? Yeah.
Stanley, do donors care about governance?
I've been begging for about 30 years now, so I think there is greater awareness of accountability, although fundraising is still very personal. And I hope that personal part of fundraising don't go away, but the accountability part increases. So as we mature, we get better at it, because accountability helps us to be more effective in what we do. There are organizations that are needed to focus purely on capacity building, which governance is part of it. So organizations like CMPL, for example, focuses on that. In my work overseas, I work with organizations where our whole task is building up capability of indigenous NPO in their governance and leadership. So I think there's a need. Like anywhere else and in every sector, you have a small percentage of donors who are leaders, who will help NPO to get better at it. But the majority of donors are still being led. So if NPO ourselves start recognizing that we need to be more accountable, donors will then understand how to give better. To give is actually a lot easier than to give well, because to give well takes a lot of effort. So I don't see investment in capacity building, in better management, better leadership. It's a struggle for donors if they are aware and they understand it.
Stephen, do your donors care, and what is the magic formula for your organization?
Stanley just whispered, 100 over years. Okay, I mean, we have to oblige Corina with an answer also, right? But do donors care? Absolutely, yes. And the example I gave you earlier was a clear display that where they wouldn't have otherwise looked at us, but it popped up because we appeared on the charity governance screen, the radar, yeah? Did we actually go and plan to do that? No, I don't think so, but we always have to whatever we do, we also want to create awareness. Hence, networking and engaging with people in influence and in the right place so that they know what you're doing and they're able to connect you up with other organizations that can help you to broaden your reach. So in that sense, I think knowing that you are an established organization with good corporate governance helps. It may not apply to every VWO, but I think the general sense of it is that they do care. So that's my answer to you.
Daniel.
I certainly think it depends on what charity. And for us, as a mental health charity, we're not very likable. You know, I mean, people will give money to children, cancer victims, but mental illness, you know, you kind of worried because what are we, you know, so that's where I think good governance makes a difference, where when we are accountable and we show the work that we do, you know, we're in the process of developing a value compass that we can show that we're creating value for not just the clients, but really for society as a whole, you know, contributing in some way towards, you know, the bigger good. I think those are the things that being accountable and measuring and all that is important. And I think, well, I'll give you an example. You know, we had a hard time getting money from Mr. Xia Fuhua, you know, for some years ago. And as a result of this, you know, he asked so many questions. You know, our ED was up in arms, and I said, this is good practice, you know. It means that we have to be really accountable for what we do. And I think it's very powerful. So I think it depends. With more sophisticated givers and the kinds of charity you're at, that's, you know, I think there was a subsidiary question I'll try to answer. How do we win the award? Firstly, I think it was the inaugural year, so not many competitors. And also, we were rather candid. You know, I actually went to the interview saying, look, there's nothing to hide. We had a lot of deficiencies, so we talked more about our deficiencies. To our staff, I've always told them one thing, and in the 4 years that I've been president, I've said, remember you have two jobs. One is the job that you currently do. The other is to improve it. And governance is about improving what we are doing.
I think there's a question at the
Yes,
at the
we
back,
do.
right? Yeah.
Sir?
Hi, I'm Kenny from Family Life Center. One question which I think begs an answer is how does a charity who wants to embark on social enterprise, of course, for the benefit of everybody, what are some of the governance issues that we might be mindful of? Secondly, how far can fundraising for this venture can be applied? Thirdly, whether or not it can be owned by the charity, and I like to address this to all the panelists. Thanks.
Maybe Stephen, social enterprise. You have major social enterprises. What are the governance requirements?
Okay, I can only speak from our our own experience, which is a plowback model, because I think there are many interpretations of what social enterprise is. But I think the underlying approach that we take is that the money or the profit or the retained earnings has always got to be, it should not be entering anybody or any person's pocket. That's bottom line. Yeah. Once it has to enter into an individual's pocket, that's not a social enterprise. So every single dollar that you yield in terms of retained earnings or profits should be plowed back into the organization's programs or your beneficiaries. So I would apply that same rule to any social enterprise that you set up. Sorry, I don't know whether.
Yeah, of course, there are some guidelines out there about charities engaging in trading activities and so on. And I guess depending on whether it's kind of core or non-core to your operations. But I think at the end of the day, it's also the transparency. And of course, at some point, they may have to think about setting up a different structure, legal structure, for example, like a separate subsidiary, depending on what they are. But so I think it's kind of a really big question, that one. So it's kind of difficult to answer that in the remaining time that we have. So maybe afterwards we can have a bit of a discussion if you want to follow up with an answer to that particular question. But I've been getting the message that time is up. So I want to wrap this up by just asking the panelists, just maybe 30 seconds. And I think, Daniel, the last thing you mentioned was about the fact that there are still a lot of things you feel that you need to improve. In the sector, if I ask you to say one thing, that you think charities can improve as part of this journey to improving governance, what would that be? One thing, each of you.
Well, I've always been a proponent for measuring and sharing what we measure. So I think that's the one thing I'd like to see. More of that measurement and sharing it so that we can all learn from one another, be open and transparent about it. I've always said that if we measure and we are ranked and we are last, it's great because you can only improve.
Funny, I was going to say the same thing. No, because, I mean, that's true. We grapple with measurement all the time. So it's, the way that we're doing it is through a program evaluation. And through that program evaluation, by looking at what is expected of us, we come up with the matrices and what are the KPIs that we want to expect to achieve from all our programs. And I think that's an area that still needs a lot of improvement as far as YMCA is concerned. But I would suspect that that's probably common and true with many VWOs.
Impact, measuring impact.
Yes, outcome impact. Yeah.
Sui.
Yes, Stanley has passed the mic to me. But just as well, because we are major...
He wants the last word.
Yeah, he does want the last word. I'm glad that Stephen said that because we are a major funder of the YMCA, and I'll be looking forward to his program metrics as a result. To be a charity worthwhile or deeper consideration is a charity that reflects, takes time to not ignore the reflection cycle, where it's well considered, it's thoughtful, it matters to this charity how our funds are well used. He gives thought to the planned impact of his programs and services, how they achieve their program results, and how they make the sense, as in CENTS, count. I think it's important for charities to show donors that this is what your charity's success would look like with their support.
Just to add to the need for transparency, as my panelists have shared, if there's one thing I'd like us to improve really is the greater ownership by ourselves of the missions that we have all started, particularly because we are dealing with a very successful government who is very supportive of a lot of our work, so we become dependent. I think if we start taking back stronger ownership, we will start practice better governance. Thank you.
Okay. I just remember that we posed a poll question. Do we have actually responses to that poll question, or?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I think the question we kind of asked, which is actually, I guess, is a theme to the morning session and I guess today, which is the most important cause of governance failures in charities. Okay, there. Okay, so the largest percentage is over-concentration of power in one or a few individuals. That's the second one is the lack of proper systems and controls. Okay, so thank you very much for participating in this poll. Okay, I think I will call this panel to a close. Please join me in thanking the panelists.